The flying type really isn't your stereotypical strong Pokemon type. Sure, it's got a few strong Pokemon here and there, but most of them are just mediocre at best. Knowing that, I decided to see if I could take on a real challenge in today's video and beat Pokémon Heart Gold using only flying type Pokemon. On top of that, to make it even more difficult, I'm going to be adding on the hardcore Nuzlocke rules that you guys see on screen now. With all that out of the way though, I'm ready to begin my journey through Johto by picking a starter that I won't be able to use at all. I then have got to continue into the game because I don't actually have Pokeballs yet, and I end up meeting up with this old man who runs extremely fast. This guy must have an insane cardio routine. After running around the entire city, this man ends up giving me his running shoes that he says are still warm, and I end up reluctantly putting them on and continuing on back towards Professor Elm, where I meet up with my rival for the first time and he decides to attack me for whatever reason. Joke's on him though, because not only is his Chikorita really bad, but I also ended up finding his ID and I found out what his real name actually is. And it's Buttface, but like B-U-T face, because there's not enough letters. Skipping past that though, I can finally learn how to catch a Pokemon, and Lyra shows me by just stomping on one until it's caught, I guess? I think that's just a crime, to be honest. I take what she's taught me though, and end up using it to catch my first Pokemon of this run, Pidgey. This Pidgey I nicknamed Robin, then find out its nature is attack down and defense up, which is honestly not that good for this early game. I kinda need a high attack stat. Not only that though, but later in the game when I get the HM for Fly, I'm gonna put it on basically all of my Pokemon, so the higher the attack, the better. Regardless of that though, I can actually catch 3 new Pokemon right away immediately after this Pidgey. For this first one, I have to wait an entire day, as I have to wait till it's nighttime so I can catch myself a Hoot Hoot. Hoot Hoot I nicknamed Night Owl, and check out its nature where it's attack down and special attack up, which is honestly not that bad since Noctowl is really a special attacker anyways. This then brings me on to the next Pokemon Caterpie, which I easily catch and give the nickname Vulture. The nature is not as important with this one, but the ability is actually super huge, as it's got the ability Shield Dust, which turns into Compound Eyes, which raises my accuracy and is going to be massive in this run. Lastly, before this first gym, I get to go into this really dark cave and find myself a Zubat. This Zubat I got and ended up nicknaming it Batman, and if you guys don't know the nickname theme by now, I don't know what to tell you. If you think you do, comment it down below. Now that Zubat's on the team though, I can head into Violet City where I can start thinking about how I want to take on this first gym. Having 4 Pokemon against this first gym leader might make it a pretty easy battle, but later on in this run, there are a ton of fights that I can barely even take on because my flying types are so weak. You guys just wait and see, this run gets crazy. That being said though, before we get into any of that, I've got to let you guys know that this video is sponsored by Marvel Strike Force. Marvel Strike Force is an amazing turn-based RPG where you can recruit over 250 plus Marvel superhero and supervillain characters to your roster. These characters include Wolverine, Iron Man, Venom, and even Thanos. From there, you get to power up these characters and take on game modes like Campaigns, Arena, and Blitz. If you're a new player, you can unlock up to 17 new characters within the first 30 days. Some of these characters include Spider-Man, Deadpool, Thor, Captain America, and many more fan favorites. Marvel Strike Force is a mobile squad RPG that allows you to battle with your favorite team of superheroes and supervillains in a fight to save the universe against threats like Doctor Doom and Apocalypse. Your goal is to power up your favorite characters to complete missions, unlock gear, and other resources. You can utilize these unlocks to beat other players in PvP modes such as Alliance War and Real-Time Arena. Go ahead and download Marvel Strike Force now using my link in the description and reach level 7 to support my channel. You can go to my description or the pinned comment down below to download the game, and if you want it even easier, you can just scan the QR code on screen and start your journey in Marvel Strike Force. Huge thank you to Marvel Strike Force for sponsoring this video, and with that, I'm ready to get back into the run. Basically, right when I get inside this city, I can evolve Vulture into a Metapod and then Metapod into a Butterfree. Thankfully, because Butterfree evolves so early, I'm able to stay just below the level cap for this gym. Now that Butterfree's on the team, I take a trip to Sprout Tower where I've got to fight this old man who's got a few too many Bellsprouts, and after I take him down, I'm actually ready to go challenge the first gym. This first gym leader is Falconer, and he's got an illegal Pidgeotto, which is gonna make this fight maybe a little bit more difficult than I was expecting. He leads the fight with Pidgey as I bring out my Butterfree. With Butterfree, I start out by going for a Sleep Powder, and because of my Compound Eyes, I actually have a very high chance of landing this every single time. Because I've essentially got this confirmed form of sleep, I can now just go for 2 Confusions on Pidgey, finishing him off and bringing out the final Pokemon, Pidgeotto. For Pidgeotto, I start out the exact same way I just did by putting him to sleep with a Sleep Powder, and on the following turn going for a Confusion. I land this Confusion only doing about a third, as on the next turn I get off another Confusion as he then wakes up and hits me with a powerful Gust that takes me down to 27 remaining. I then attempt to get off one more Confusion, hoping for a high damage roll, but I don't get it, and I bring Pidgeotto down into the red as he then heals up with a Roost. It's at this point that I go for another Sleep Powder, and after putting Pidgeotto to sleep, I can finally go for just a couple more confusions and finish off Pidgeotto, winning me my first badge. With Faulkner down, I get to go visit the professor's assistant, and he ends up actually giving me an egg. This egg is actually one that I can use in this run, and after running back and forth for way too long, I end up hatching a Togepi. This Togepi I nicknamed Birdman, and after taking a look at its ability, ew, Hustle sucks. Regardless, I've just gotta deal with it now, as immediately after getting that bad news, I can evolve my Togepi into Togetic. Now that that's out of the way though, I can actually continue on into the game a little bit, and that takes me to Union Cave, and through there, Route 33, where I can actually get an encounter. Unfortunately for me though, the bad news just keeps pouring on as I end up encountering a Hoppip, but I realize I forgot to refill on Pokeballs, so I don't have any to catch this thing. It'll be okay though, I guess, because I'm pretty sure I don't need it for this next gym, but it definitely would have been nice to have another Pokemon. Anyways though, after going into the next town, I find out that Team Rocket seems to have taken every single Slowpoke, and I wonder why. It can't be any bad reason, right? Yeah, no, they're actually eating them. They're cutting off their tails and eating them. That's horrible. I put an end to Team Plasma's horrific game, and after that, I go into the second gym where I just want to forget all about it. This second gym battle is against the Bug-type gym leader Bugsy. You guys can tell, Game Freak thought long and hard about that name. Regardless, he leads with Scyther as I bring out Vulture. Scyther starts out by going for a Leer, lowering my defense by 1 stage as I then go for a Sleep Powder. This puts her to sleep, and it allows me to get off a free Gust, which does about a third, but at this point, I'm kind of scared to stay in. I don't want to get hit by a crit quick attack, so I decide to switch out into Night Owl. Thankfully, Scyther actually stays asleep on the switch in, but on the next turn I don't get so lucky as she gets off a quick attack, and that takes me down to 23 remaining. On that same turn though, I'm able to set up a Reflect, which means physical moves won't be doing as much damage to me in the future. Now that that's the case, I decide to go for a quick peck with Hoot Hoot to activate Scyther's Citrus Berry, and at that point I just want to switch into Birdman. I then can slowly put Scyther to sleep and go for about half a dozen extra sensories until eventually Scyther goes down, and jeez, that took forever. Now all that's left is Metapod and Kakuna, and because both of these Pokemon really aren't that strong, I can easily take him out with Pidgey and win myself my second gym badge. After the battle, Pidgey is rewarded for his efforts and ends up evolving into a Pidgeotto. I then use this Pidgeotto to absolutely annihilate my rival Buttface in a battle. It's after this battle that I head into the forest and capture these Farfetch'd. I don't put them in a Pokeball or anything, I just gotta grab them, and eventually once I do, I end up getting the HM for Cut. This HM is the only way I can progress into the game, so I've got to go all the way back to these previous routes where I catch myself a Wooper and a Rattata. Both of these Pokemon I'll just utilize for HMs because, you know, I have flying types. Now I can finally progress into the game though, and once I do, I find this Kimono girl who's lost and alone. I end up helping her out and meeting up with Lyra. In this conversation with Lyra, she ends up giving me her number, and honestly, I don't really want it. I feel like that's just a case. Regardless though, I can now head into Goldenrod City, and once I get here, I gotta do this little quiz that I kept failing over and over again until I found the right answers. It didn't take me too long, and eventually after I completed it, Whitney was like, "Wow, you did so good," and then she goes into her gym. I'm not really sure what the storyline is there, but I get to go fight her now, I guess. Before doing that though, I wanted to go on to the next route where I've actually got a 1% Yanma encounter that I can get. This 1%er took a little longer than I'm willing to admit, but eventually after getting it in the ball, I gave it the nickname Falcon. I also got a chance to see that ability, which was Speed Boost, which is exactly what I wanted. With all that out of the way though, I've actually got a full team of 6 Pokemon going into my fight against Gym Leader Whitney. She leads Clefairy as I bring out Vulture and start up by going for a Sleep Powder. This forces the Clefairy to sleep, and on the next turn I get off a Confusion that only does about a 4. This Clefairy clearly didn't want to take a nap though, because she wakes up after just 1 turn of sleep, but because she missed a double slap, I don't take any damage for it, and I put her back to bed on the next turn. This then allows me to connect with a couple more Confusions until Clefairy goes down, leading into the dreaded Miltank. This is Whitney's final Pokemon, and she starts out by going for a rollout that thankfully misses, allowing me to get off a free Sleep Powder, but because Miltank has a Lumberry, she immediately wakes up. On the next turn, I end up forced to eat a quad super effective rollout, which really ended up hurting me, but thankfully I do get that sleep off, and with Miltank asleep, I've definitely got to switch out. But for some crazy reason, I decided not to, and I elected to stay in and go for a couple of Supersonics until I landed one. Kind of a crazy move on my end, I won't lie, not really sure what I was thinking, but it does end up paying off as I hit a Supersonic and switch out into Birdman. Miltank doesn't really stay confused for that long, but it is just long enough for me to get off 2 consecutive charms, which lowers Miltank's attack stat to -4. Even after the 2 charms though, I get hit by a critical hit Stomp, which definitely scares me, but I do get off the yawn before I switch out, so I move into Falcon and Miltank goes to sleep. This then allows me to get off a ton of Sonic Booms until eventually Miltank goes down, and I've won my 3rd badge. Beating Whitney makes her go pretty crazy. She starts crying and whining, but eventually she hands me the badge, and I can move on to this flower shop where I get this little squirt bottle. After using this squirt bottle on this poor unsuspecting Sudowoodo, he ends up running away, and I can head into the next city. Once getting here, I get to go into the Burn Tower where I see the legendary dog tree on the ground, and I've also got to battle my rival. Thankfully for me, Buttface is still a Buttface, and his team really isn't that great right now. He does have a Magnemite, which could be a problem later on in the game, but for now it's pretty easy to deal with. Regardless of that though, after the battle I end up scaring away these dogs, evolving Night Owl into a Knocked Owl, and also evolving Batman into a Golbat. From there I can actually run around a little bit until my friendship is high enough with Golbat to evolve him into a Crobat. This is the final evolution I take onto my team before challenging Morty for my 4th gym badge. He leads this fight with Ghastly as I decide to lead with Crobat. Crobat outspeeds Ghastly, so I'm able to go for just a single bite as Ghastly goes down to a one-shot, and the next Pokemon to come out is Haunter. He experiences the same fate as his brother Ghastly and ends up getting one-shotted by a single bite as the 3rd Pokemon to come out is Gengar. With Gengar, I start out by going for a bite, which does exactly half, as then he heals up a little bit with a Citrus Berry, but thankfully he did get flinched. On the next turn, I'm able to get off yet another bite that takes him down to about a 4th remaining, but he then gets off a critical hit Shadow Ball, which does a ton of damage. If that would have gotten a higher damage roll, it honestly probably would have killed me. Thankfully though, I ended up being alive and well, and after Gengar heals, I get off another bite that takes him down to half, but at this point, I've definitely got to switch out. I move into Birdman, which allows me to get off an extra sensory, which finishes off the Gengar and brings out the final Pokemon, Haunter. Haunter ends up absolutely eating an extra sensory, as all it takes is one for him to go down and get me my 4th badge. With that badge acquired, I head into this little theater place where I get to save one of the Kimono girls from Team Rocket. After saving her, this random old man that was watching the fight ended up giving me the HM for Surf. I can't really do anything with it right now, so I just head a little further into the game where I find myself in Olivine City. In this city, I run into Buttface, who starts complaining about this problem that's going on at the lighthouse. Before dealing with any of that though, I decide to teach this Wooper Surf so I can go towards the Lake of Rage, which is located just north of Mahogany Town. In the Lake of Rage, I find myself a Gyarados, which is absolutely ravaging the surrounding area, so I've got no choice but to catch him. This Gyarados is a shiny, which is kinda cool, I guess, but it's also a flying type, which means I'll be able to use it throughout the remainder of my run. I give Gyarados the nickname Hawkeye, then check in with Lance, and he thinks Team Rocket definitely had something to do with this. He then asks me to meet him at a souvenir shop in Mahogany Town, but rather than doing that, I've got bigger fish to fry, and I decide to go back to the lighthouse. From there, I determine I've got to take a trip to Cianwood City, but before I can pick up the medicine that's there, I've got to take on the 5th gym leader. Chuck leads this fight with Primeape as I bring out Crobat. I easily outspeed Primeape, so I start out by going for a wing attack, which does about 2/3, as then Primeape sets up a double team. Thankfully for me, that double team didn't matter whatsoever, as I'm able to land another wing attack, finishing off Primeape and bringing out the final Pokemon, Poliwrath. Poliwrath's pretty bulky, so when I go for a wing attack, it doesn't even do half. I'm then forced to take a body slam, which takes me down to 69 remaining, and on the following turn, I get off yet another wing attack. This brings Poliwrath into the red, activating his Citrus Berry, as he then tries to hit me with a Hypnosis, but because the accuracy on that move sucks, it misses. This then allows me to get off one more wing attack, finishing off Poliwrath, winning my 5th badge. After beating Chuck and getting the Storm badge, I'm now able to actually use the HM Fly. This means not only do I have a higher base power move to use in battle, but I can also fly around these cities way quicker. With that, I can finally get my medicine from Cianwood City, then go back to Olivine Town where I can heal the Ampharos in the lighthouse and get ready to challenge Jasmine for my 6th gym badge. Her team is actually really difficult for me to deal with, as she leads with Magnemite and I bring out Vulture. With Vulture, I start out with the classic sleep powder strategy, and after getting it off and putting Magnemite to sleep, I then go for a Supersonic. This lands, confusing the Magnemite, and at this point, I start to just spam Silver Wind until eventually Magnemite goes down. With this next Magnemite that comes out, I do the exact same thing, going for a sleep powder, then Supersonic to confuse him. The Supersonic was more of a precautionary measure of anything, but I ended up getting super lucky twice in a row, as they ended up staying asleep, allowing me to take them both out with Silver Wind. Now that they're both out of the way though, I take on what could be a super difficult Pokemon in Steelix. For Steelix, I switch out into Night Owl, so my Butterfree doesn't have to tank a quad-effective Rock Throw. Because Night Owl definitely outspeeds Steelix, I'm able to freely set up a Reflect here, and thankfully, I don't go down to an Iron Tail. With that Reflect up, I'm not really worried about taking too much damage anymore, so I just freely switch into Hawkeye and go for a couple of Surfs until Steelix goes down. This earns me my 6th badge and takes me back to Mahogany Town. In this town, I almost completely forgot about Lance, but I remembered really quickly when I watched him use Hyper Beam on this poor civilian. It's at this point that I remember I've got to go through basically all of Team Rocket in this hideout, and it really does suck. This place took me way longer than it should have, but eventually I made it to the end where this Murkrow says Hail Giovanni into this door and opens it up, and I see a bunch of electrodes. I don't really know what's going on, to be honest. This room is kind of my worst nightmare though, as I've got to go up against a bunch of electrodes and hopefully take them all out. Thankfully for me, they're all level 23, so because of that, I'm able to go through them pretty easily considering my team's in about the mid-30s. Seriously though, if these Pokemon were only 5 levels higher, I could have had a real problem here. Encountering any high-level electric type right now could really shock my team. Get it? Cause like shock? Yeah, no, it wasn't funny. Regardless, I can now go into the Mahogany Town gym where I've got to battle these ice types for my 7th badge. Right before starting this battle, I evolve my Yanma into Yanmega, then I start by leading with Night Owl as he leads with Seal. Seal's only level 30, and since Night Owl has a relatively strong air slash, all it takes is a couple of those to take it down. In the process, I really only took minimal damage as this then leads into Dugong. Dugong starts by going for an Ice Shard, taking me down to 62 as I then go for an air slash, only doing about a third. At this point, I was pretty committed to just staying in and going for another air slash, and I figured if Night Owl were to go down here, it honestly wouldn't be the biggest deal since I have a lot of Pokemon I can use. Either way, I just decided to stay in, and I ended up landing another air slash, but it got a critical hit, so it took Dugong out. This is actually pretty huge, as not only do I remain deathless, but Paloswine gets sent in next, and this is a pretty easy KO for my Gyarados. All I've got to do now is just simply switch into my Gyarados and go for a couple of Surfs until eventually Paloswine goes down, and I win my 7th badge relatively easily. Now the next step after this mess in Mahogany Town is to go all the way back to Goldenrod City and play a little game of dress up as I dress up as Team Rocket. The goal of this was to try to sneak into their secret hideout, but Buttface actually exposes me, and it's like, why would you do that? We're on the same team here. Kind of. All this does though is make my Team Rocket experience even more difficult as I've got to go through basically all the Team Rocket members I just went through. On top of that though, Buttface makes another mistake and decides to challenge me in a Pokemon battle. He's lost in all of these. Why is he fighting me again? I do end up getting a reward for fighting him though, and that's evolving my Pidgeotto into Pidgeot. Either way, in the basement of this radio tower, I end up finding the real director and heading to the top of the radio tower to fight the final member of Team Plasma, Executive Archer. All this guy's really got is a simple Houndour, Houndoom, and Coughing. Because his team is really not that great and my team is pretty well equipped to deal with all 3 of those Pokemon, all it takes is a couple of moves and eventually Executive Archer is done. That ends up getting me the Rainbow Wing from the director, and that means I'm finished with Team Plasma. Rocket. Whoops. Too much black and white. Now it's time for me to head into this icy cave where I've got to do a bunch of dumb puzzles and stuff to get out. I don't know if I'm just stupid or these puzzles are just really obnoxious, but it takes me a while to get out, and eventually after saving the last Kimono Girl, I find myself in Blackthorn City where I'm ready to challenge the 8th gym. This gym leader is Claire, and she leads the fight with Gyarados as I lead with Falcon. With Falcon, I started by going for an Ancient Power, doing a little over a third as Gyarados then hits me with the Dragon Rage, which always does 40 damage. On the following turn, I get off yet another Ancient Power, but this one's actually a critical hit, and it ends up taking out Gyarados. This is a huge crit for me as it ends up prematurely bringing out the second Pokemon Dragonair. Because I led this fight with the Bug and Flying type Yanmega, I figured that the Dragonair that would come out would have Fire Blast. This was a huge call out by me as it allowed me to switch into my Gyarados and take almost no damage on the switch in. From there I go for an Ice Fang with Gyarados, but unfortunately I actually get a really low damage roll and I do just enough damage to not kill. It's on that same turn that I end up getting paralyzed by a Thunder Wave, and at this point I could try for another Ice Fang, but there's a chance it misses and doesn't kill again, so I just decide to switch out. I move into Birdman as Dragonair heals, and I end up getting off a Yawn, which is able to put Dragonair to sleep. Once Dragonair is dozing off, I switch into Vulture and go for a pair of Bug Buzzes, which is able to finish her off and bring out the second remaining Dragonair. Against this Dragonair, I decide to put her to sleep right away with a Sleep Powder. I then go for a Bug Buzz, but get a pretty low damage roll, so I don't even do half. It ends up being completely fine though, as I put her to sleep again after her Shed Skin activates, and just 2 more Bug Buzzes finishes her off and takes out the last Pokemon, Kingdra. Kingdra starts out by being really annoying and goes for a Smoke Screen, which means I can't reliably put her to sleep. This ends up being just fine though, as all I've got to do is switch through a flurry of my Pokemon until I end on my Pidgeot going for a couple of flies, finishing off Kingdra and winning myself my 8th and final badge. While on my journey to complete the game, I meet this old man who's got a couple of questions for me. One of them is basically, do I prefer strong or weak Pokemon? And it's like, obviously strong, why would I prefer weak Pokemon? Regardless, he won't let me continue until I say both, so I do, and Claire gives me the gym badge, which I guess she didn't give me before. Either way, after going back to New Bark Town, I find out that the Kimono girls have a message for me, and I also get myself a Master Ball. Before visiting the Kimono girls and their evolution fight, I decide to catch myself a Gligar, because this Jolteon that I've got to fight soon is gonna be a real problem without it. After catching Gligar, I give it the nickname Raven, then continue on to go fight the Kimono girls in a battle. I've got to be very strategic about these fights, considering the Kimono girls have every single evolution, and those are powerful. They are actually really strong. The scariest Pokemon would have definitely been this Jolteon, but because I caught that Gligar earlier, I'm actually able to beat it with no problems. Gligar basically completely counters my electric type weakness, so I'll be using that anytime I need to fight an electric type from now on. Regardless, after completing my Kimono girls quest, I'm actually able to go to the top of the bell tower and catch myself a Ho-Oh. This Ho-Oh is pretty easy to catch when you have a Master Ball, and I caught it and gave it the nickname Spider-Man. All of that though leads me on towards the Elite Four, where I'm almost ready to complete the game. All I have left to do is go through Victory Road and fight my rival one last time. He leads with Sneasel as I lead with Hawkeye. Sneasel's got an obnoxiously low defense stat, so all it takes is just one waterfall to lead into the next Pokemon, Magneton. Against Magneton, all I've got to do is just go for one Sacred Fire, and that's enough to kill, bringing up the third Pokemon, Haunter. For Haunter, I kinda don't want to stay in, so I decided to just move out into Batman and go for just one bite, finishing off Haunter, leading into Kadabra. Like Sneasel from earlier, Kadabra also has a pretty poor defense stat, so all it takes is one super effective bite to bring out Meganium. Vulture is able to make some pretty quick work of this not so strong dinosaur as the last Pokemon Golbat comes out. For Golbat, it's another simple switch into Yanmega this time, and after just a couple of ancient powers, he goes down, and I've won my final battle against Buttface. Like a Buttface ends up running off, saying he'll beat me one day, and blah blah blah. I'm not really listening. I beat him in the battle, that's all I care about. This then leads me on into the Pokemon League, where I get my team up to the level cap and get ready to challenge the Elite Four. Will leads this fight with Xatu as I bring out Falcon. Against Xatu, I started by going for an ancient power, doing a little bit over half as I then get hit by a Confuse Ray. With that, I get my speed boost, and on the following turn, I'm able to finish off Xatu with yet another ancient power, leading into the next Pokemon, Jinx. Jinx, being an ice type, is a little weird for me to deal with, so I decided to bring in Ho-Oh. On the switch in, Ho ended up getting hit by a Psychic, and on the following turn, I get hit by a second Psychic as I'm then able to get off a Sacred Fire, finishing off Jinx with a one-shot, leading into Slowbro. For this, I decided to move into my Beautifly, and on the switch in, Slowbro ended up setting up a Curse. On the next turn, I go for a Bug Buzz, taking Slowbro down into the red, as she then goes for another Curse, and it doesn't really matter at this point as she ends up healing, but it's way too late for that. One more Bug Buzz ends up killing, and brings out the next Pokemon, another Xatu. For this, I make a little bit of a dumb switch and decide to move into Batman for whatever reason, and I end up getting nailed by a Psychic, and it takes me all the way down to 48 remaining. I ended up immediately having to switch into Pidgeot, then getting off a Fly, then having to switch out again because this Xatu does too much damage. Finally, I was able to take it out with my Gyarados, bringing out the final Pokemon, Executor, and for this, it's a simple switch into my Beautifly, and one Bug Buzz later, I win my first Elite Four battle. My next one's up against the Poison-type Elite Four member, Koga. He leads with Ariados as I decide to bring out Spider-Man. Ariados really isn't the greatest Pokemon, so just one Sacred Fire is enough to one-shot and bring out the second Pokemon, Fortress. This Pokemon is 4 times weak to Fire-type moves, so as you can imagine, it's yet another one-shot. The third Pokemon is Muck, who's weak to Psychic-type moves, so I decided to go for an extra Sensory and end up getting a lucky flinch as it only does about half. Because of that flinch earlier, I'm easily able to get off yet another extra Sensory, finishing off Muck, bringing out the next Pokemon, Crobat. Crobat is a bit more difficult to take out because it outspeeds me and starts out by going for a double team. Crobat is way more difficult to take out because it outspeeds me and starts out by going for double teams. This makes it really hard for me to hit him, and eventually I get brought down to 66 HP before landing an extra Sensory and finishing off Crobat, bringing out the final Pokemon, Venomoth. Venomoth is yet another Pokemon on his team that's weak to Fire-type moves, so all it takes is one more Sacred Fire to finish off the Venomoth and win me my second battle against Koga. Going into the third Elite Four battle against Bruno, I actually forgot to heal. Since I did a sweep with Ho-Oh, I didn't realize I needed to heal, and I just didn't, I guess. Still, it really shouldn't be that hard of a fight considering he's just rocking his fighting types. The first Pokemon to get sent in is a Hitmontop as I lead with my Ho-Oh. With Ho-Oh, all it takes is 2 extra Sensories to finish off the Hitmontop, but I do get brought down to 27 HP remaining, so there's no way I can bring him in for the rest of the fight. The next Pokemon to come in is Onix, and for this, I just decided to make a switch into Gyarados. Because Onix is a horrible Pokemon, it's doing barely any damage per turn with Rock Slide, so I just take this opportunity to set up a bunch of Dragon Dances. Eventually, after setting up 3 consecutive Dragon Dances, there's really nothing else I have to worry about in this entire fight, so Onix gets hit by a 4-time super effective Waterfall that easily KOs. Gyarados. The next two Pokemon, Hitmonchan and Machamp, both go down to the exact same fate, and this leads into the final Pokemon, Hitmonlee. Hitmonlee is easily OHKO'd by just one waterfall, taking me to the final Elite Four battle against Karen. She's got her dark types and leads with an Umbreon, as I decide to lead with Beautyfly. Against Umbreon, I start out by putting him to sleep with a sleep powder, and on the following turn I go for a Bug Buzz that does a little over half, as thankfully he stays asleep. This allows me to get off one more Bug Buzz in the following turn, finishing off Umbreon and bringing out the next Pokemon, Murkrow. Against Murkrow, I'm simply able to just go for one Sacred Fire, which is enough to KO, and bring out the third Pokemon, Houndoom. Houndoom's a little more difficult because I can't hit it with any of my Ho-Oh's moves, so I decided to just do a simple switch into Gyarados. My Gyarados is relatively powerful, so all it takes is one 2x super effective waterfall to take him down and lead into Vileplume. Because I know Vileplume is probably gonna go for a Petal Dance, I decided to switch into my Crobat, who takes 4 times not very effective damage from it. Because of that, all I've got to do is go for a couple of Flies and a few Cross Poisons to finish off the Vileplume and bring out the final Pokemon, Gengar. Against Gengar, I simply just switch into Falcon and go for a couple of Night Slashes until eventually Gengar goes down and I win my final Elite Four battle. With that, I get to fight the champion Lance in my final battle of this run. Lance leads the fight with his Gyarados as I decide to mirror him and lead with my shiny Gyarados. With my Gyarados, I elect to set up 3 consecutive Dragon Dances as Gyarados hits me with a couple of Dragon Pulses. After that third Dragon Dance, I decide to go for a Strength against Gyarados, and it does about half as Gyarados hits me and brings me down to 50 HP remaining. Thankfully, just one more Strength is enough to finish off Gyarados and bring out the next Pokemon, Aerodactyl. Aerodactyl is just one of those Pokemon that I couldn't have on my team just because I couldn't find it, and I decided to go for a Waterfall against it just to show it who's boss. This easily kills, and after showing Aerodactyl whose team he really should have been on, the next Pokemon to come out is Dragonite. This Dragonite is no match against a +3 4x super effective Ice Fang, and neither are the next 2 Dragonites that come out right after him. The last Pokemon that Lance sends out is the Fire and Flying type Charizard. Because of that Fire type, Charizard stands no chance to a Waterfall, and after washing him away, I have won my final battle of this run. Thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please consider hitting that like button and maybe subscribing because it would really help out the channel. Thank you guys, and I'll see you later.